I will be talking about what shaped U.S. history the most during the 1960s. So in the 1960s, in the United States was a period of a lot of social change and major historical events. The Vietnam War, anti-war countercultural movements, the Civil Rights Movement, and second-wave feminism all had a big impact on American society. However, with these key actions, the Vietnam War and its resulting anti-war countercultural groups had the most impact on the United States during this time. The Vietnam War had a big and conflicting impact on American society and politics in the 1960s. The United States' participation in Vietnam increased drastically with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964, resulting in big force deployments and intensive bombing campaigns. This escalation had serious internal consequences, including widespread military service evasion and societal frustration. The draft primarily impacted poor, uneducated, and unemployed males, resulting in considerable social unrest and protest. Initially, 2/3 of the men fighting in Vietnam were volunteers, but as the conflict progressed, the draft grew more common, causing millions to actively seek ways to escape induction. The fact that 16 million eligible young men never served in Vietnam demonstrates the war's unpopularity and the lengths people will go to avoid participation. Key events such as the 1968 Tet Offensive and the My Lai Massacre had a profound impact on public perception regarding the Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive, a large wipe by North Vietnamese forces, was a watershed moment in the war, exposing the terrible facts of the situation and undermining public trust in the government's promises of immediate victory. The My Lai Massacre, in which U.S. troops massacred over 400 Vietnamese civilians, increased anti-war sentiment while also highlighting the conflict's moral and ethical dilemmas. These events weakened public support for the war and fueled the call for its end. The anti-war movement, characterized by huge protests and local engagement, left a lasting impact on American culture and politics. Organizations like Students for Democratic Society, SDS, and major events like the moratorium protests in San Francisco rallied a generation against the war and U.S. imperialism. These demonstrations symbolized more than just the conclusion of the war. They were also a critique of American society and ideals. The countercultural movement, distinguished by its rejection of established values and experimentation with alternative lifestyles, arose as a direct response to the war, advocating a radical review of American culture. This cultural upheaval was represented in the era's music, clothes, and societal conventions, like the hippie movement, representing a rejection of mainstream American values and a call for societal change. In contrast, while the Civil Rights Movement was critical in addressing racial inequities, it has a smaller reach than the vast cultural and political transformations caused by the Vietnam War and countercultural movements. The Civil Rights Movement achieved significant progress in demolishing racial segregation and discrimination through significant incidents such as the Birmingham Children's Crusade and the Selma March, and legislative accomplishments such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who delivered his I Have a Dream speech, played critical roles in mobilizing the movement and advocating for social justice. Legal wins, such as the Brown v. Board of Education decision, signified important progress in the struggle against racial injustice and motivated future movements for equality. The Civil Rights Movement had a major impact on society, resulting in increased political and societal awareness of racial concerns. However, its influence was more focused on specific social injustices than the broad cultural and political upheavals witnessed during the Vietnam War and countercultural movements. While the Civil Rights Movement provided the framework for future social justice movements, it was the Vietnam War and the countercultural response that fundamentally altered American culture in the 1960s. The second wave feminism, while vital, had a smaller immediate impact in the 1960s than the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. This movement focused on topics such as gender equality, pay equality, and women's rights, resulting in substantial advances in public expectations and tangible consequences, like improved access to sports and redefined roles in the workplace. The movement's impact grew stronger throughout the 1970s, capitalizing on the momentum gained in the 1960s. Advocating for gender equality and changing regulations to encourage women's participation in many sectors were critical steps toward future equality between men and women. But these changes were part of a longer-term transition rather than an immediate overhaul of society. While the civil rights movement and second-wave feminism were important in addressing specific social injustices and increasing equality, the Vietnam War and anti-war countercultural groups had a far-reaching and widespread impact on American history in the 1960s. The Vietnam War had a major impact on politics, society, and culture, sparking significant protests, redefining American principles, and transforming societal standards. The Vietnam War and its resistance profoundly transformed American identity and standing in the world, leaving a lasting effect.